Brought to you by Moonbeam Multimedia.
This is 16 to 1, a podcast about education, teaching, and learning.
How you doing?
Good, how are you?
Good.
Good.
Can you tell me about this cookout that you had last week at school? That sounded kind of fun.
Our tailgate? Yeah, for our PBIS.
Which is?
Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports. And our assistant principal. We did a tailgate before our football game on Friday night for the students. So we had the ag students that take the barbecue science class. They made pulled pork and smoked wings. And we had a bunch of donations of food and treats and all kinds of good stuff. It was awesome.
That sounds really cool.
We had a great time. Good weather.
Yeah.
Great time.
That committee that you're on, that's kind of your work, generally speaking, right? You're like you're looking for efforts to build community, school community.
Yeah.
I just think it's really cool to hear about that and the work that you do.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So we're doing that, or we just did that. About time for our canned food drive. When some of the clubs are currently accepting donations for people affected in Western North Carolina by
that's good.
The hurricane. Lots going on.
Yeah.
Lots to do.
Busy time of year at school.
Yeah, very busy. And it's almost, we only have like 2 more weeks in the 9 weeks.
Ooh. Okay.
It's
Grades are going to be due soon.
It's a little busy.
All right.
Yeah, we're
I hope
busy.
you're holding it together, teachers.
We are. Sort of.
Sort of, kind of.
It might be gum holding it together, but it's being held together.
Shoestring, gum.
How are you?
I'm doing well.
Good.
Yeah.
That's okay. That's not bad.
There's nothing much to report.
All right. Well, let's just jump in then.
Okay.
What do you have for us?
Well, this week, I want to talk a little bit about misinformation and disinformation. And the timing of it is good, given that we are coming up on... Well, we're in election season. It's in full swing in the United States.
It is.
Though we're going to talk about this with regard to how it impacts schools and school communities specifically, not so much the broad state of everything on the internet being chaotic.
No. Please no. This episode would be 6 years long.
Yeah. Just note that we do recognize the broader scope of this problem, but we're going to be talking about how misinformation and disinformation impacts school communities specifically, and what schools, educators, students, parents, families, anybody in an educational community, what we can do to sort of push back against those forces. And what our responsibilities as members of educational communities might be. Before we jump into that, just want to remind you, go ahead and sign up for the 16 to 1 podcast email newsletter. You can get the latest updates, episode announcements, resources, workshop offerings, everything like that from Moonbeam Multimedia. That is us.
It's us. It's going to be so easy. We're just going to completely debunk misinformation in this short educational podcast.
We're just going to solve all of the problems all at once.
Facebook, please listen to us. Okay.
No, or maybe don't. I don't know. Misinformation, disinformation. These terms get used interchangeably sometimes, but they don't mean the same thing. Can you help us clarify, Miss English teacher?
Of course I can. So misinformation is false or inaccurate information. Disinformation is false or inaccurate information deliberately crafted to mislead, manipulate someone's feelings or a sentiment about something, or just to cause harm.
Pernicious, weaponized misinformation.
Yep.
But misinformation can just be you don't have the facts straight. Or something got lost in a game of telephone, or,
Right. So both of these things, though, as we know, can cause harm to schools and learning environments in a few different ways.
Yeah.
This has always been true. But at the speed at which it now spreads, it's a little bit more challenging than it had once been.
Yeah.
To kind of handle.
Yeah, I think that's been hard for schools to confront, because it happened little by little and then all at once with the kind of gradual takeover of mass internet communication tools. We just ended up in this scenario where we're playing catch up to the forces that have been introduced as a result of the way that we communicate. It tends to have impacts on schools that are uniquely challenging, let's just say. can cause all kinds of distractions that end up taking a lot of time. So this can just very simply hamper learning outcomes. I feel like I hear you talk about this, and increasingly so.
Constantly.
You tell me what misinformation was the tidbit du jour. Basically, like, what is the
flavor of the day? Yeah.
What's the popular misinformation that your kids are repeating today that you have to have a discussion about?
Yes. And it's every day. It's something new.
So it is definitely at front of mind for a lot of teachers.
So much time.
Just a lot of time. That's going to be a big takeaway from this, or at least it was for me, is that just how much time educators and administrators have to spend dealing with the results of these forces. So it can also create confusion and anxiety.
Me too.
Yes, can confirm. But especially disinformation, that's kind of the point. It can cause increased feelings of animosity and division and conflict. And you know, just these general feelings that we're all experiencing has something to do with the fact that 2/3 of all U.S. adults get news from social media.
It's too high.
We don't.
The number's too high.
That's a troubling statistic for sure.
Being surrounded by teenagers, I know that I'm hearing the copy paste of whatever was said at the dinner table.
The raw copy pasta.
Yes.
You're hearing it.
Yeah.
It's a unique perspective. Really is.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, to hear what happens at so many dinner tables every day. You're in a unique position. Anyway, so it does tend to, as a result of all of this, undermine trust, and so chaos. And volatility really is the goal of disinformation, especially organized disinformation campaigns and political disinformation. Chaos is the point. Not knowing which way is up is the point. Creating
the doubt, yes, all of that.
Creating an ethic, a societal expectation of chaos is the point of
That's
disinformation.
how it drives.
So just think about that when you hear the funny things that got spread at the dinner table.
I try.
Anyway,
I try to find humor. There is so little.
Let's get into some of the effects on schools and learning here. I found a pretty interesting report. This is from an organization called the National School Public Relations Association. They did a study, just released it in June of 2024. They conducted this survey of schools, and they were trying to gauge the impact of false information in school ecosystems. And they said that from the survey they conducted, that 78% of their respondents said that their schools or organizations had experienced a challenge caused by the spread of false information in the past 12 months. That's a lot.
Yeah, we just did a couple weeks ago.
Yes. Well, you can actually maybe talk about it, because one of the other takeaways from that report was that school safety and policy issues are the most frequent targets of false information. So what did you have to deal with a couple weeks ago?
There was a slew of Snapchat stories that were being shared and sent around, and Facebook posts about people planning to enter a school
with a weapon.
With a weapon.
Yeah.
This happens a lot anytime that there is a school shooting in the news, is that there's then a follow of people suggesting the same thing might happen. And so it starts maybe on Snapchat or Facebook, and it gets copy pasted and screenshotted and shared, and the identifying information about where the post came from or who originally posted it is lost over time, because that's how it works. And so then it becomes...
And fear, I just want to interject and say that fear amplifies this effect.
It does.
Yeah.
And so a couple weeks ago, we were dealing with a potential threat, which was at no point an actual threat.
It turned out to not be substantiated.
Yes.
Basically.
And this happens probably, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 times a school year, something like this.
But how disrupted was your day because of this? And I'll call it misinformation. I don't think this was necessarily happening on purpose, but I think that given the fact that student safety was
in jeopardy,
it spreads like wildfire.
It's truly, those are like lost days in schools. Our attendance is really low. Kids that are there are absent, right, because of whatever they've heard, whatever they think they know, whatever they believe the truth to be about the allegation. So they are very hard days. And because there's always that little thing in the back of your head. That's
what if it's true?
If it is today.
Yeah.
When that happened a couple weeks ago, I thought to myself when I was getting dressed, I was like, I probably shouldn't wear clogs. It gets in your head. And so I put on sneakers. You know what I mean? Like that's what it does to you if you work in a school or your, whatever your capacity might be.
It creates confusion and anxiety, leading to increased division and conflict.
Yeah. So everything, every knock on my door that day, I was like,
yeah,
and so the kids do the same thing, or they're always looking out the window or whatever.
Yeah.
They're tough days. They are some of the hardest days,
right?
For sure.
These are not abstract conversations. These have tangible effects on learning environments.
Yeah.
And measurable.
Yes, because how dumb am I to be lecturing on Julius Caesar? Most days they don't listen to me, let alone the day that they think they might just be killed. I hate to be so blunt, but that's what those things do to all of us.
Yeah. So it's lost days not only for kids who don't come, but for kids who do come.
Yeah, because what are you listening to me go on about the effectiveness of this emotional? No, you're scared. And I am too. And that's why I just keep rambling about Julius Caesar. We're all doing the same thing.
So you're speaking directly to, yes, in fact, misinformation and false information does disrupt your day to day.
Can I just put not a Band-Aid over all of that, but I want people to report things. I want information to be shared with schools and districts and personnel that need to know. But the fear mongering that was happening on Facebook on these posts, at no point was anyone did you call the school?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what's hard.
Yeah.
So obviously I'm all about see something, say something, but maybe don't help perpetuate those things when you see them.
Saying something doesn't mean say something in a Facebook comment.
If you read it on Facebook, don't comment on the Facebook post, call your school.
Well, that's actually, let me segue into the next point, because this study, this same National School Public Relations Association study, they said that Facebook was kind of the biggest vector, the biggest problem of false information spreading. The second was word of mouth.
Yeah.
They said
which
that,
kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah, other platforms were really far behind, but basically it was Facebook is the issue.
Yeah.
And
I would agree.
From what I have seen of the way, I don't even know what to call it, information, it's not even information, stuff, the way that stuff spreads on the media.
It's outrageous.
Facebook it has a sort of singular hold over the American psyche for some reason, even though usage is not high among certain subpopulations.
Yeah.
So anyway, something to keep in mind, especially if your district is using Facebook as the only vector of communication, which it should absolutely not be doing.
Well, in this case, and in a few of these cases, it was not something that our district put out that caused this to happen.
Oh, for sure.
It was our local village's Facebook page where anyone can get on.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
Share.
I did not mean to suggest.
No, I just wanted to clarify this specific incident. Not that there aren't tons of other very obvious issues with Facebook, but in this case, this was
Yep. The problems happen on the unofficial, non-sanctioned communities. You can use these platforms, these tools to disseminate information, but it's what happens when it kind of escapes your control. That's the problem. So just a final thought on that survey I thought was pretty interesting. 65% of the respondents said that they spent 1 to 4 hours weekly addressing the impacts of false information on their schools or districts. That is our tax dollars at work fighting and grappling with the effects of false information. It's just an incredible expenditure of time and effort and money and all of the things that I find pretty frustrating that schools have to deal with. So, okay, let's pivot to talking about identifying and analyzing.
Pivot. Let me first just share a list of questions that everyone should be asking themselves about any media that they interact with.
Yes, I like this.
Okay. This comes from a New York Times article. The link itself is in the show notes. So please see it for further information. But this was the list of questions. How credible is this? And how do I know? Is this fact, opinion, or something else? Can I trust this source to tell me the truth about this topic? Who might benefit from this message? Who might be harmed by it? How does this make me feel? And how do my emotions influence my interpretation of this? How might different people understand this message differently? And the last question, is this message good for me or people like me? I think you can probably debunk most anything with any combination of these questions, but I always start by thinking, can I trust this source? Am I the target audience or someone else, right? And how might other people interpret it? Those are like the first three things that I like go through personally when I read something, whatever.
I've been adding a different question to my own personal media literacy list. How likely is it that what I'm reading is written by a human?
That's a good question.
That's becoming an increasingly important one.
That's a good one.
Did a human write this?
Yeah.
If not,
and
why?
Where did that info come from?
If a human didn't write it, why? Do I want to read something that a human didn't write? So many questions.
Yeah. The other thing that goes along with this is like, how will I handle being incorrect about this if I am incorrect? And that's like something I ask myself all the time in the classroom.
Oh, like how do I handle mistakes? If I make a mistake as an educator?
Like, and I think that's a really important part of it. I make a big deal of correcting myself when I'm wrong. And I tell my students, hey, I messed this up. Here are 3 sources where I figured out what was this, or that.
Yeah.
And I made a mistake a few weeks ago in class. Lord knows I make a million every day, but I don't remember what I did that day. And one of my students goes, wow, can't believe you made a mistake. What a teacher. And I was like, wow, what a human. I just can't believe I made the mistake either. And I like said it in the exact same tone as a student who said it to me. And they looked at me and they were like, oh yeah, I guess you probably do. And that was it. And I was like, woo, I sure do. But thanks for just trusting me blindly.
Look at us navigate that ambiguity.
But that was all it took. And it was an easy interaction. And it was funny enough that the kid could be like, well, all right, that's fair. And we just moved on.
Yeah.
But they at least heard from me that I make mistakes. No, I know it.
It's all part of a strategy of media literacy, for sure. And being willing to admit when you haven't gotten something right is very important. I think the other thing that I would love to see more of is people talking about how and why they changed their minds about something.
Yes.
I have a lot of, let's say, slightly heated political conversations. By heated, I don't mean like mad, but just like, impassioned. Impassioned, let's just say. I have impassioned political discourse with people. But I find a lot of times the reason I get frustrated in political conversations is because there isn't enough time to uncover context, and there isn't enough time to go through the sort of history of why you came to think what you think.
Where you got and how you got there. Because
the journey is kind of more important. A lot of stuff gets reduced down to which side you're on, but like how you ended up on the side that you're on is important. Is many times very important for these kinds of conversations. So anyway, I guess I wish that with students we could set more expectations of you're gonna change your mind about these things that are very closely held. Yeah. Wherever they're, whether we're talking about like religion or politics or values but it can even happen in like academic subjects. You can realize that what you learned was incomplete or from a limited perspective or whatever it may be. I think we need more humility in general toward change. So anyway, sorry, go ahead.
It's always really interesting to hear people talk about a politician being a sellout or a whatever because they've like changed some view or maybe revolutionize the way that they believe or vote or think about something. I just think it's so dangerous to be so set in your ways that you can't learn anything that might change the way you think. And so I'm always so fascinated, like when my students say something, especially about a politician, because they didn't used to think this way and now they do. And so I'll like push back and be like, well, haven't you like changed how you think about something? Or haven't you learned more? Or haven't you whatever? I just don't see it as a weakness or as the wrong thing.
Yeah.
I mean, change those beliefs.
Sure.
Like, I mean, now if you're voting one way because somebody's stuffing your pants pockets full of money, then like that's a problem. But
No. And I think that helping people discern And it's not an easy thing to discern. When politicians change their minds about things,
Yeah.
it
For
is
what
difficult.
reason?
It's difficult to know for what reason.
Yeah,
it really is difficult to know, because you can, if you're a politician, you can say something, but a lot of people aren't going to believe what you say. I agree with you that what gets lost in that is the humility to change one's mind in the face of new information.
For sure.
Totally agree with you there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's move on.
Okay.
Talk about the role of educators a little bit.
I would love to.
This information's from Media Literacy Now. Again, links in the show notes. Media Literacy Now is a group who works to help support states and their stakeholders in legislation to make requirements for media literacy.
Okay.
And so actually, Ohio, as far as this one specific thing goes, is a little bit ahead of the rest of the process. We are one of 7 states which already have taken what Media Literacy Now considers significant steps towards comprehensive media literacy education.
Oh, good for us.
So we've been doing this since 2009. Other states are still working on it. So there's a group of 7 that have already taken what they consider significant steps. There's another dozen or so that are advancing. And then currently there are another 9 states that have legislation pending on information, media, and technology literacy in their Department of Education, their standards, their state expectations of schools.
Does Common Core have anything to say about media literacy explicitly? It's a little hard because the border that defines media literacy is a little bit blurry. Critical reading skills are part of media literacy.
Yeah, I mean, Common Core does. I mean, Common Core wants you to assess multiple sources, and yeah, I would say so.
So it does, but kind of maybe not quite as pointedly as some of this
nearly
other,
as pointed as what
these
states are trying to approve.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, the name of that group is Media Literacy Now.
It said California, Delaware, Florida, New Jersey, Ohio, Texas, and Washington are the ones who have taken significant steps toward comprehensive media literacy.
Yeah.
That's such an interesting collection of states.
It's a really weird group of states. It is.
I'm just thinking of the politics of those states. They're so all over the place.
Like you have Delaware.
Yeah.
And then you have Jersey.
Yeah.
It's weird. Okay.
Okay.
So that group is working with tons of states right now, trying to support and pass that kind of legislation.
Okay.
Because they realize that this is so important. So actually, another thing for educators coming up is Media Literacy Week.
You have a whole week.
A whole week.
To celebrate.
We need more than that, but it's a good start.
Okay.
It's October 21st through 25th. And Media Literacy Week was actually inspired by Canada's Media Literacy Week.
They beat us to it.
Yeah, of course.
Our neighbors up north.
Yeah, we already knew that.
They're more polite, and they beat us to Media Literacy Week.
Yes.
Okay.
Damn them. Okay. So the U.S. Media Literacy Week is hosted by the National Association for Media Literacy Education.
Okay.
Their mission is to highlight the power of media literacy education and its essential role in education. Just because this was kind of hilarious and the call is coming from inside the house, their sponsors include Google, TikTok, Roblox, Microsoft, and our dear friends Meta.
Oh, no.
So that seemed important to include.
Okay.
I like Roblox on the list. I think that's nice.
Threat vector Roblox. Okay. No, but I mean...
But Meta...
Yeah, Meta being
giving
on
this thing money.
Google and Meta, I mean all of them
TikTok,
really.
yeah.
All of them being on this list. That's quite curious, but...
Yeah.
Okay.
So this year their theme is access, analyze, evaluate, create, and act. And each day you focus on a different part of that process.
Okay.
I've included the link in the show notes. They have sources, support, and lesson plans for anyone interested in Media Literacy Week.
I think the place that I want to start with this is in the thought that the reaction to misinformation or disinformation can make the problem worse. Have you found that to be true in the course of your career?
Yes.
Okay.
Lord, yeah.
Preventing the spread of misinformation, the spread of false information before it catches fire is probably the most effective strategy to stop it. So questions like, is your district communicating important information clearly and frequently? Are you communicating on a variety of channels? Are you meeting your constituents where they are? this is me getting on my soapbox again, but please, I beg of you, do not treat Facebook as your only or first or primary communication channel, even if you have a lot of constituents there. This is what your website is for. Your official school website is that primary channel of communication. But definitely publish there first, publish on your own site, and syndicate elsewhere. I'm a technologist, and this is a pretty commonly known principle known as POSSE. Publish on your own site, syndicate elsewhere. A really goofy acronym, but it's a great way to maintain authority and clarity if you're publishing on the internet. So anyway, do you have clear communications policies in place? Do parents and students in your district understand them? Do they have clarity about when and why they're going to hear from you? Personally, I think that misinformation and disinformation catch fire when there's an absence of a strong culture of communication.
I agree with that.
That doesn't mean that school districts are by themselves responsible for when things go wrong. They're absolutely not. This is clearly a problem baked into the tools that we use to communicate, especially online now. But districts have much more success when they have strong cultures of communication. And then I think the other thing that I think is going to become increasingly important is a dedication to professional development that works with training educators and administrators to fight the spread of false information.
One of the things that we looked at, Crash Course, which is one of the probably most popular education YouTube channels that I know of, and they cover all kinds of things, but they have a whole series on media literacy, and it's available on YouTube, and their link is below in the show notes. But we watched the first episode. It's really well done. It's a great starting point for someone wanting to learn more or to find a great resource for their classroom. So I would really recommend Crash Course's media literacy, their collection of videos, if you are just trying to start on the ground and figure out where you want to start.
This is gonna chafe to hear for some people, but I think that educators have to start taking seriously AI's impact on education, educational technology. Educators have so far done a really good job of learning about how social media works and how it can promote mis and disinformation. I think we need the same level of scrutiny for AI. It's the new technology du jour that's being shoved into every consumer electronics device. I feel like I've said this before on the pod, but it's going to be ubiquitous, and it's going to happen whether we want it to or not. Lots of problems tied up in that technology for educators and classrooms. Talked a lot about plagiarism, all kinds of things, but the threat vector for misinformation is huge with AI.
Yep.
It's going to continue to be a real big challenge for media literacy because this technology is positioning itself as an alternative to search when its relationship to the truth, to factual information is actually very shaky because of the way it works. Let's talk a little bit about engaging your students and also other community members, but let's start with students.
Yeah.
How do you have these conversations in your classroom? How do you see misinformation leaking in?
Well, I hear a lot of, I read this, which is a substitute for TikTok told me. Not many of my kids are actually reading the news. They're just absorbing it through short videos.
Headlines are flashing across their eyeballs.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I definitely play the long game in these conversations. Say a kid comes up to me, since we're in Ohio, this has been one recently. So a kid will tell me about some specific event, in this case, maybe where a person allegedly ate someone's pet. And I say, well, I haven't read about that. Where'd you read it? And then it's, I saw it on Facebook. And I'm like, okay, well, was there an article or was it just a story? And I'll usually start that way. I try really hard to not have any kind of tone about it other than just like, tell me more, Part of the conversation is always like, well, I'd like to read that. So why don't you find a source that confirms your story and share it with me? And then that will usually send the kid into a frenzy of Google, right, to search for whatever this thing is. And Facebook is blocked at school, thank God. And so they can't find the original post and they can't be on their phone, and that's just a blessing. But what that forces them to do is to go online and to look for this information. And
to become more media literate, perhaps?
Yes. And if they can find it, then they show it to me. I've never had a single student follow up with a source. other than a Facebook screenshot of something that they've read. It is a long game because I have to plant the seed that is, how are you going to prove this? And where did you learn it? And what other source or whatever medium corroborates what you've done?
I mean, it's especially difficult for you because you have to plant a seed that sometimes controverts what they're hearing from authority figures at home.
Right. So I can't be who I am politically or personally or socially or anything like that. I just have to be this beacon of truth as an English teacher to be like, how do we know the truth? How do we confirm the truth?
Not a beacon of truth like you hold all of the correct facts, but a beacon of truth finding.
Yeah.
Like a beacon of caring about how we find out the truth.
Mm-hmm. So kids have gotten frustrated. Kids have been like, well, you just don't believe me. And I'm like, no, like I have no reason not to believe you. I want another source. I want proof. And so I've had kids be like, well, if so-and-so told you this, would you believe them? And I'm like, well, I said I would listen like what I'm doing right now, but I would still go find support if they don't provide it to me, if it's something I feel strongly enough about. So if you can teach me, then I'll listen. Mm-hmm. And it is not a damning sort of like, well, that's a stupid thing to say. Why would you believe that? It is just me being like, show me, prove it to me, and prove it to yourself. I usually don't hear whatever that line of thinking is ever again, at least not to me. That doesn't mean that they've changed their mind and believe something, but I at least made them think about it for that period of time, which is all I can do.
That's sort of your number one job, making people think? I don't know.
And the amount of times that I say cite your sources as like a bit is astronomical. And it's like to the point where if kids say something like really outlandish, another kid will be like, cite your sources, like mocking me, but they actually get it. And so like they're poking at me because it's seriously something I say. I don't even know how many times a day. But I love it because they at least know that I'm not just going to believe them. So I'm playing the long game. It's a patient game, but it's a worthy game. So anyways.
Let's talk about how schools and districts can play the long game with other constituents in their community, meaning like especially parents, but also other community members.
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of what you were talking about earlier is like a strong culture and strong communication is the key for a healthy school.
Yeah.
And like their community, right? There are all kinds of ways that schools can reach their stakeholders, right? It could be a school newspaper, a local newspaper. It could be the school's website, their social media profiles, email newsletters, all calls home, and then like our learning management systems. Like in my school's case, we use Google Classroom. But there are also tons of other communication apps that can be used to help reach people. And so we use Remind, which is an app where you sign up with your cell phone number to receive text from whatever, but it doesn't actually share anyone's personal cell phone number with each other. So it's like a way that I could reach students on their phone via text that isn't my personal phone, and it's with my school Gmail.
There are definitely unique constraints for communication applications in schools because of protecting student privacy and all kinds of stuff like that. So.
But using a combination of those things usually helps build a really rich and healthy community where information is easily shared and freely shared.
I will keep beating the drum that diversifying communication channels is really important. And the reason I am saying that is because of how pernicious any one of these platforms in isolation can be. So just keep that in mind. But I will also say that a lot of these tools are companies being very competitive in a space for limited school dollars. They are trying to, pretty aggressively operate businesses. So sometimes I think these tools and platforms get shoved at schools and they don't always actually have the needs or best interests of schools in mind.
Yeah.
You can end up adopting all of these tools and having a kind of chaotic approach to communications, which is probably just as bad as having not enough communication, is having too much communication that is all over the place.
I think there's a fine line there.
Yeah, it's really difficult. It's really difficult to navigate.
And I will say that in my school district, we have Progress Book, which is where their grades are. We have Google Classroom, which is where their assignments are. We have the school's website, their login for their lunch portal. We have this new thing called Final Forms, which is where they fill out all of their emergency medical forms and they file their medication paperwork. And we have Dazzle, which does scheduling for events. It's like comical how many freaking things you have to like have an account for to figure out what's happening in this darn place.
Well, districts, no, I mean, you're laughing, but it's a serious problem. Like,
no, it is. But I'm laughing because of how goofy it is, and I can't find what I need, and I'm employed.
Oh, absolutely. No, this is why like a coherent strategy is really important, because this stuff is, you can very easily get super overwhelming. Yes. You can get information overload, and then you get in a scenario where you can no longer effectively communicate because there's just the signal to noise ratio is too high.
Yeah.
You just named off this slew of communications tools, and I don't fault anybody for doing this, but it seems like, oh, let's pick this up, let's do this, let's start using this thing, and over time, you just get this many-headed hydra, and it's difficult to have clear channels.
We're all over.
So I have seen districts be more successful where they crank up the transparency to foster better community relationships.
Yeah.
There's a crisis communication response that says something like, okay, batten down the hatches, go into this kind of defensive hiding posture.
Go quiet.
Yeah, just like radio silence in the face of a crisis or an issue. This is really pernicious in educational communities. Increased transparency is what fosters trust.
I agree.
I think that perhaps educational leaders think that they're getting themselves into trouble when they communicate, and so they stop communicating. But I think that it's more about like the quality and consistency of communication is actually what is being responded to there. It feels like they're responding to you communicating. They're actually responding to a previous breakdown in communication.
For sure.
And then I guess what I would say about that is that it's important to bring parents and community members and other stakeholders into policy discussions in public schools to help set community expectations and norms. Bring your stakeholders in and say, hey, we're gonna involve you in these decisions, but we're gonna stick to these decisions as a community, and we're gonna hold ourselves to these standards for communication. And you can expect us to do well at this because you're a part of it. We need your help to do this well, but you have to extend the invitation, even if you don't want to, even if it feels like really annoying to do so. You have to extend the invitation.
And it's hard as a teacher to like put your neck out too. And that's what some of these things are.
Yeah.
You're inviting a conversation you don't want to have, but it's because it's actually for the good of everyone to have it.
Same for administrators. Yeah. I mean, this is equally difficult for administrators to want to do. So nobody wants to invite criticism and critique. No. It's just unpleasant, but
it sucks.
But I think the more we do it, the more we practice doing it, the more constructive it becomes, the less hostile and critical and sided and divided. Okay, fill in the blank.
Here we go. This is that thing where we ask you a question, you email us your answer, we send you stickers.
Yeah. hello@16to1.com, all spelled out. That's our email address. We would love to hear from you. For this week's trivia question, would you like to ask?
Last episode's question.
Yes.
Here we go. One of our very favorite TV shows just turned 25 years old, The West Wing.
It makes me feel so old.
If you're unfamiliar, it's a political drama which stars Martin Sheen and Allison Janney and not Rob Lowe, among an incredible star-studded cast. I'm just kidding. Rob Lowe was a very important member for many years. So The West Wing
You're gonna start this like deep personal beef with Rob Lowe.
I hope Rob Lowe listens, and I'll tell him I loved him in Parks and Recreation. Okay. The West Wing was the first TV show created by Aaron Sorkin. So prior to writing this show, Aaron Sorkin had worked as a writer and director for films such as A Few Good Men and The American President, one of maybe the greatest American storytellers.
Yeah,
and The West Wing is his little baby.
There were some fun articles in media recently.
Yeah, because part of the cast got to go visit President Biden.
Yeah,
and visit the White House, and
because of the 25th anniversary, it was kind of making the rounds again. And a lot of people were talking about how that show, The West Wing, represents a sort of aspirational politics that we don't really have a lot of, even if it's not necessarily realistic. That's one of the criticisms of the show, is it's like almost too idealistic.
Well, it gives you hope in democracy.
In the process of democracy.
Yes. Yeah. And it feels just so good to watch a show where everyone is doing everything they can for the betterment of others. And I love that.
Yeah, I think it's
Like,
not...
that's the American thing, right? Like, that's
It's not a bad
should be.
thing to have art that inspires us to be better than what we are now. And I think that that's one role that show plays. We've been rewatching it so recently. The other thing that I find a little bit comforting in it is even watching it in the current political context and how little things have changed.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of things have changed, and
But at the same time,
tastes
nothing
and
has
culture
changed.
is different, but they're dealing with the same geopolitical conflicts that we are now. It's just like, I don't know, maybe that's not comforting, but to me it is a little bit comforting that even in the midst of what feels like pretty intense political chaos of the last 10 years or so, we're still, having the same conversations that we were having 25 years ago. We're still striving to deal with and confront the same challenges, and I think it's just like kind of revealing of human nature, I suppose. But it is comforting to watch people get along in the effort to try to make humanity better. Agreed. That's what it's about. Okay, and then this week's question. The Aurora Borealis, the Northern Lights, it's again been visible for many people throughout the United States. It was the last week or two, I think. Who named these lights the Aurora Borealis? Aurora was the Roman goddess of dawn, and Boreas was the Greek name for the north wind.
I didn't know that.
Who named it?
What we learned.
Yes.
You want me to go first?
Go for it. Tell us what you learned.
Okay, so I recently learned about the naming of storms.
Oh, okay.
I was reading about Hurricane Helene. I also shared some groups I work with will be collecting things to help support those most impacted. So in the show notes is a link to the American Red Cross to find out ways you can support those if you so choose. But anyways, as I was reading about Hurricane Helene, I learned about how storms are named. There are 6 alphabetical lists of names for Atlantic hurricanes, and they're maintained by the World Meteorological Organization. And they're rotated every 6 years.
Okay.
A storm doesn't get a name for quite some time. It has to have winds of 39 miles per hour, and it has to be a tropical storm. And then once the winds hit a sustained 74 miles per hour, it then gets upgraded to a hurricane. But it's already had its name. At one time, storms were named for saints.
Oh.
And then in 1953, the National Hurricane Center made the list. That list was just women. Rude. Only women's names until 1979. And then they decided that men could also have storms named for them.
Men can also destroy things?
Yes.
Is that what, okay.
I think that's what happened in 1979. And so in 1979, the list alternated between men's and women's names. So those same 6 lists have been rotated since 1979. Some names do get retired, sometimes without any sort of reason. They're just gone. And sometimes, unfortunately, names get retired if a storm is incredibly deadly. There will never be another Hurricane Katrina. There will never be another Hurricane Floyd. When those lists come back up, Katrina has been replaced with Katia, and Floyd has been replaced with Franklin.
Did you read anything in your research about why we started giving them names in the first place?
Yeah, they said that the biggest reason they gave them names was to help distinguish different storms within the year.
Okay.
So if they're talking about like...
It's basically a mechanism for the media to talk about these
events.
And
just, for the sake of identifying dates and things like that.
Okay.
Like if you're like the spring of 80, whatever.
Got it.
Like for some reason, I could never tell you what year this was, but the beach I grew up going to, Holden Beach in North Carolina, they got hit really hard by Hurricane Hugo. I don't know when that storm was, but there are multiple houses on Holden Beach named like after Hugo, son after Hugo or whatever. But yeah, it was basically just a convenience thing to name them something.
Interesting.
So that's what I learned about storm names. Did you know that?
I did. Yeah, I did. I
knew they had like an alternating list.
Yes.
I didn't know that the list didn't used to include men.
I did know that actually. Yes. I know that I have heard this before because I remember my feeling of irritation having heard that
that the men weren't on the list.
Right. That it used to be only women. I remember the feeling of irritation, like, okay.
Well, that's rude.
So nice.
Imagine. I guess if they were going with saints, they wanted no more saints because the men were getting hit too hard. So then they made it just the women to even out. I'm just kidding. Anyways, that's how they name storms.
Cool.
What'd you learn?
You little weather nerd.
I know I was. Well, it's because there's like 3 more forming as we speak.
Yeah.
Anyways, tell me what you learned.
I would love to. I learned some new things about mixing and mastering music this week. I'm a little music nerd.
You are.
On the side.
You're very talented.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I really like making music. I enjoy it.
You do. It's good for you.
It makes my soul feel good. So I make some music every now and again. And a couple of years ago, I switched to using Logic Pro, which is just like the Mac music software that many people use to produce music. I switched to it, and I'd used other programs that do similar things in the past, but I hadn't really dug deep into learning this software. So I just worked on a project to teach myself the sort of ins and outs.
Yeah.
It was really fun.
It sounds great, too.
Yeah, I'm self-taught, so it was kind of funny because I was using Chat GPT to help me. I was like, I don't know what this is called when sound does this, but it kind of sounds like whatever. And I would try to describe the effect that I was
to get
trying.
What you wanted.
Right. And to be like, oh, you need an envelope. Oh, you need a distortion, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh, I've seen that in the menu in the software program, but I didn't know that that's what it did. It was nice to feel the tool become more powerful for me as I learned some of those things. So it was a fun little exercise.
You did great. And I really enjoyed it. And I'm going to slide it into the show notes.
Okay. Maybe not, though.
Okay, we'll see.
But thank you.
I have edit access.
So that's what I learned.
Joke's
I learned
on
about some music.
Okay.
Okay. Any final thoughts, parting shots?
In 2 weeks, we'll be back. We'll have a headline.
We will. We'll have
episode.
education news headlines.
The election will be quickly upon us. So if you have not figured out your voting plan, please do so ASAP.
Registration deadlines have
probably
come and gone, probably.
Make sure you get all your stuff in order if you go vote early in person where you live, or if you need to make a plan for the day of voting, please. This is like the last chance you have.
Have a plan.
We will see you in 2 weeks for a headline roundup.
We'll talk to you then.
Goodbye.
Bye. Listeners, thanks for supporting 16 to 1. We're your co-hosts. I'm Chelsea Adams.
And I'm Katie Day. Find our show notes, archives, and resources, sign up for our newsletter, or get in touch with us via the contact form at 16to1.com, all spelled out.
We are so grateful for our listener support. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing to the show and telling your friends or colleagues about it.
The show is edited and produced by you, Chelsea Adams, and you're also responsible for our show's music.
And you, Katie Day, serve as lead researcher and social media manager.
Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you next show.
Stop it.
Guys, click on the SoundCloud.
SoundCloud.